Hello, and welcome to today's call with Congressman Adam Smith. During today's call, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 now. You may also sign up for his newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time during the call. Again, please press star 3 now or at any time to ask a question, or star 6 to subscribe to his e-newsletter. With that, I'll now turn it over to Congressman Adam Smith.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody joining tonight. I found the telephone town halls to be incredibly helpful to me in terms of getting feedback from all of you about what's going on. It's a good way to get in touch with several thousand constituents all at the same time, reaching into your home to make it easier to attend. So I very much appreciate that. There are a lot of issues. I'm not going to cover them all. I want to get to your questions. Short term, I think one of the most significant things, obviously, is the deployment of U.S. troops to Los Angeles, and also the president's increased immigration enforcement domestically. I'm very worried about that. As the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, it is pretty close to unprecedented to deploy U.S. troops over the objection of the governor and over the objection of local law enforcement. And I'm worried about that being applied in other places. And look, the situation was not out of control in Los Angeles. There were a couple of hundred protesters there. ICE was able to do its job. They were able to pick up who they wanted to pick up, detain, and deport. So it was a dangerous escalation of the situation, and I hope we can keep that under control. And also in terms of the immigration policy, we've talked about this before, but I agree that we need to secure the border. And there was definitely a problem with that. President Trump has taken a number of steps to do that. I don't agree with all of them, but overall, we've definitely seen that we have a more secure border. I also agree that if you have criminals who are here and are not documented, that should be the priority for deportation. But what he has begun doing is targeting workplaces, targeting people who are not a threat to our community, who are in almost all cases working, paying taxes, raising families, contributing to our community. I don't think that makes us safer. It has definitely terrorized a large portion of the community, and it has not been limited to people who are here undocumented. A number of people with legal status have been picked up. People who are here with asylum claims, waiting hearings have been picked up. So I think this goes beyond that, and I hope we'll have a more sensible approach to immigration policy, and we'll keep the U.S. military out of it going forward. The other big issue, of course, the tariffs. We're coming up on the July deadline when President Trump wanted to implement widespread tariffs across the board on almost, I think it's over 100 countries. He suspended this for 90 days. I had a meeting today with some of our union leaders, including the longshoremen. It's beginning to have a real impact on goods getting into the U.S., and I think the policy is really undermining our economy. I mean, targeted tariffs, targeted approaches to industrial policy make sense. Declaring a trade war in pretty much every country in the world, I don't think does, when frankly, the real threat competitively is China. And we're engaged in those negotiations with China right now. But we need partners and allies if we're going to deal with the economic threat that China presents to us. So alienating all of them through the tariff policy, I think, has undermined it. We also continue to have the problem in terms of federal programs being frozen, federal employees being laid off. There are over a dozen, I think a couple of dozen court rulings now ordering President Trump to rehire some of the people he has fired and fund programs that have been approved. Not all of those court orders are being followed. This will eventually get up to the Supreme Court. They will have to decide, and we will see if the Trump administration pays attention to it. And I'm worried about that. Just a couple of days ago, last week actually, on Thursday, Secretary of Defense Hegseth was before the House Armed Services Committee. He was pressed on whether or not he would obey a court ruling if that court ruling said that the deployment of troops to Los Angeles was illegal. And he did not say that he would obey that court order. That is a fundamental threat to our Constitution and to our separation of powers within our government. So I think we need to insist that the Trump administration obey court orders when they come down. Another big issue going on right now is the budget reconciliation package, which passed the House. The Senate is now considering it. Estimates show a couple of things. One, that budget will knock some 12 million people off of health care. Two, it will transfer wealth from the lower end of the income scale to the upper end. The estimates that I saw were people in the wealthier tax brackets will benefit to the tune of about $12,000 a year. People on the lower end will lose $1,600 a year. It's a reverse Robin Hood budget that I don't think is what we need right now, given the fact that opportunity and equality are so difficult. We have some roughly 60% of the population that is struggling to pay their bills. We need to help the working class, not the folks who are already making a ton of money. So I'm worried about where that budget would go. And lastly, that budget, of course, adds about $2.5 trillion to the debt. So if the debt is your issue, I do not see why you would want to vote for a bill that increases the debt by $2.5 trillion. So a lot of issues, lots of challenges. We also are coming to the end of fiscal year 25, and we do not yet have a fiscal year 26 budget. And that could also jeopardize a variety of different programs and just sort of the fiscal health of the country. Last thing that I'll mention, I am deeply concerned about the corruption in the Trump administration, with particularly on crypto issues. And the president is literally raffling off access in terms of having people buy his meme coins, and then giving greater access to the White House. And he's made couple billion dollars off of this already. That shouldn't be allowed and shouldn't be permitted. We should not be commoditizing the White House. So there are a lot of issues, as I mentioned. Certainly the war in the Middle East is very, very concerning. The war in Ukraine continues. We'll address those issues as well. But I could talk for the next hour about all of these, but I want to hear from you. So I'm going to stop talking, take your questions, comments, suggestions. We'll get through as many as we can. So I'll turn it back over to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. I would like to take an opportunity to remind everybody that if you would like to ask a question live, you could press *3 at any time. We'll go ahead and start with an online question. This one comes from Erica, who asks, what are you doing to hold the president and members of Congress to the rule of law?
Yeah, no, those were some of the issues that I just mentioned that I'm concerned about. I think we need to speak out publicly. I participated in one of the No Kings rallies yesterday. I think it was incredible to see just in our state alone, well over 100,000 people showed up in various different places to express their concerns about exactly that. And that is the way we begin to turn this around, is to get the people of this country to express their dissatisfaction with this. I have spoken out constantly. I do regular videos on social media. I'm on cable TV and radio and podcasts a lot, arguing exactly that point, that we have a president who has decided that the law does not apply to him. We've seen it in terms of the court orders that have been ignored. We've seen it in terms of the corruption that I referenced a moment ago. And it's difficult because he is president. He won. Can't move him off of that office just yet, but we can certainly put pressure on him and crucially put pressure on Republican members of Congress. Basically, to the extent that Republican members of Congress feel like the president is not doing things in the best interest of their constituents, that begins to turn the tide. We've seen some criticism of the president's policies on Ukraine, tariffs, and other things thus far. Republicans have not broken ranks. But that's the path. It's something I've said many times. We have to get to the point where Republicans in Congress fear their constituents more than they fear Donald Trump. Now, part of that is Democrats offering up a reasonable alternative. Not just Democrats, but also anyone who disagrees with where the president is going. What's a better economic policy? How do we get actual support to the working class? And I think we've got some good ideas on that. I think the Build Back Better agenda that was going to reduce prescription drug costs, was going to raise taxes on the wealthy, to pay for more programs to help the working class with things like childcare, education, healthcare. I think that's a good agenda. But we also have to show people that we will secure the border and we will enforce the law. And actually, I think the protests have been really good in that regard. People have spoken out, but any criminal acts of vandalism or violence have been extremely limited. And when they have happened, the people doing it have been arrested, as they should be. So I think a strong, loud, peaceful set of protests, and also continue up the lawsuits and continue having people like me speak out publicly and often against what the president is doing on all of these issues is the path forward. And I think it is beginning to bear fruit. Now, I will say we got to be persistent. It's not going to happen in the blink of an eye. I have changed the way I used to put this. I used to tell people that in politics, you have to be patient and persistent because it takes time. Well, in light of the Trump administration, I'm now saying we have to be impatient and persistent. This has got to be a 365 messaging battle to hold the president accountable. And we're beginning to see the numbers. And the president does change when this pressure comes to bear. You saw that he reduced where he was doing his immigration raids, not by as much as he should have, but he changed. He has suspended a lot of the tariffs that he intended to put in place. He even briefly talked about maybe putting a tax on the wealthy. Didn't do it, but he is responding to the voices of the people demanding that he be held accountable. I'm going to be one of those voices, but it's going to take millions, and we've got them. We just got to organize them, speak loudly and consistently.
Thank you, Congressman. We have a question submitted via Facebook from Dan. He writes, "It's easy to enumerate what Democrats are against. What specifics are Democrats for? Not generalities such as God and country, but where is the Democrat version of the big, beautiful bill?"
Yeah, well, I just outlined it to some extent. The big, beautiful bill. It's funny, we had BBB too. Build Back Better. And what Build Back Better was we were going to look for places to save money so that we're not driving the debt through the ceiling. One of the big ways was on prescription drug costs, support aggressively allowing Medicare and Medicaid to negotiate lower drug costs and bring those costs down. We did it for insulin, but there's billions of dollars in more money that could be saved by allowing the negotiation for that. And also, I'm not afraid to say, I think taxes should be higher on the wealthy end and even some of the upper middle class. I don't think we should have the Trump tax cuts. What's that going to do? That's going to get us back to a more fiscally responsible place. And then we can support programs that help working people get jobs. We can help support for childcare. We can help support for early childhood development. I think those programs are crucial. We can actually get people covered on healthcare. Another big point, I support a universal access to healthcare plan. I'm a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. It doesn't have to be Medicare for All, to my mind. I think there are a number of models throughout Europe, but everybody gets healthcare coverage. It's not going to be free. Everyone's going to pay a little bit, but we'll have universal access to healthcare. So if you get people healthcare, if you get them child care support, if you get them job training, and you get healthcare costs under control and a tax base that's reasonable, then you can begin to help lift people up. Now, again, I'll also say, I think Democrats should be in favor of comprehensive immigration reform. Yes, that is a pathway to citizenship for some people who are here undocumented, but it also supports reasonable border security measures so that it's not just an open border where we don't have any control. I think we need to show that we can have that type of security. I also am a strong supporter of building more housing and permitting reform, reducing the burdens of permits, regulations that are driving up the cost of housing. One unit of affordable housing costs like $1 million, given all the regulations and permitting that are surrounding it. We need to reduce that and get those costs down. There is no end of specific ideas. I supported the increase in the minimum wage, which we've done in a couple of places. There's also a thing called the PRO Act, which would enable unions, will make it easier for unions to organize and collectively bargain so that workers can get fair wages and fair pay. There is no end of specific ideas that we have to offer. And I'm with you. I don't think we should offer generalities. I think we should lay out those specifics as I just laid out, aggressively advocate them, support them, to build broader economic prosperity and focus on greater equality and greater opportunity for all.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll now turn to questions via the phones. Again, if you would like to ask a question live, dial *3 at any time. Our first question comes from Lynn, who calls from Bellevue. Lynn, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Am I on the phone?
Yes, you are. Good
yes,
evening.
ma'am,
How are
you're
you?
live with the Congressman.
Okay. Yeah, I know this is not the highest priority, but I'm very concerned about the PBS and the NPR taking away their funding, and this is just another attack on free speech, and it's also taking away from cultural and scientific and the arts in general. And I'm wondering where you think that sits and if we're going to lose that.
Yeah, I'm with you, and this is something I didn't get the chance to get into in my opening remarks. But the president's assault on science research has been across the board. We've seen what Secretary Kennedy has done to eliminate the vaccine board, NIH, CDC. They're firing scientists all over the place. They're deporting a lot of scientists, blocking others from getting into the country. The United States of America has led the world, certainly since the end of World War II, in research and science. People have wanted to come here to develop new ideas, new products, new solutions in healthcare, in energy, in a wide variety of different areas. Blocking that doesn't make sense. And I do think that NPR, public broadcasting, having that conversation is part of it. That's part of what exposes people to something that isn't just responding to the algorithm of the moment to feed you information that you've already decided that you agree with. It opens up a broader discussion and conversation about a wide range of important subjects. And we're not talking about a lot of money. It's a relatively small amount of money for public broadcasting, and it is performing, I think, an important service in terms of the information it provides. I'm enough of a capitalist that I believe in, media being allowed to do its thing and go out and the private sector generate and have people have interest in it. But I think it's also important to have some broader subjects and broader discussions on all of those issues. Now, where it stands, the president has frozen that money and sent a rescissions package to the House, which, by the way, is the reverse order of how you're supposed to do it. The president's not allowed to do that. He's supposed to ask for congressional approval, which he did after freezing it. It barely passed in the House, 214 to 212. And it's now before the Senate to see if the Senate will uphold those cuts. And I don't know. I don't think anyone knows at this point whether or not it's going to get the votes. And then we'll have the fight over this in the budget that's coming up for next year as well. It's a small amount of money that I think does benefit our communities, so I will support funding it.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next call comes from Chris, who joins us from Seattle. Chris, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congressman. Thank you for doing this. I was wondering, now that we're having big talks about the deficit, if there were conversations between Democrats and Republicans about reducing military funding instead of cutting all these services like Medicaid.
Yeah, no, I have voted against, several increases in the defense budget. I will say the defense budget right now, as a percentage of GDP, is the lowest it's been since the end of World War II. It's a bit of a myth that we've massively increased defense spending. We really haven't. The increases that we've seen in spending, over the course of the last 30, 40 years has primarily been on, a variety of different social programs. I mean, Medicare is more expensive, Medicaid's more expensive, Social Security, and that's good. I think those are good things to fund. You're not going to be able to balance the budget just by cutting defense spending. And I do think we have national security needs. We have national security threats that are out there. I do not agree with the Republicans and others who are saying that we should spend 5% of GDP on the defense budget. Right now, we spend slightly less than 3%. I think it would make sense to hold it steady at that number. So I don't have any problem with that. I don't agree with people who say we can just cut the defense budget in half and not have any problems out there. Serving on the Armed Services Committee, I am privy to a lot of information, and there are a lot of terrorist organizations still out there that do threaten us. I am worried about what Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are doing. I think we need to have a deterrent capability. I don't think we need to go above, the 3% of GDP that we're spending on it right now.
Thank you, Congressman.
I should have mentioned this
We'll turn
earlier.
to-
Sorry, when we have a caller on the line, you can go ahead and leave them on the line after they ask the question, in case they have a follow-up or in case they don't think I adequately addressed what they asked.
Yes, sir. All right, we will move on to our next question that comes from the question submitted online. The question comes from Mona, who asks, how can the U.S. help to stop the Israel-Iran war?
I think one of the best things we can do, and I'll say I agree with the Trump administration wanting to try to negotiate with Iran. I think that needs to happen. That's the way to stop it, is to convince Iran to abandon its nuclear program and stop supporting the terrorist groups that threaten Israel. President Trump was engaged in those negotiations. I will say I think it was a huge mistake when President Trump took us out of the Iran nuclear deal that was passed under President Obama. That nuclear deal was holding. Iran was not moving towards a nuclear weapon. And when that agreement was ended, they started enriching uranium and moving back towards a nuclear weapon. But we need to be involved in that negotiation, and the Trump administration is trying to be involved to convince Iran to come to the table and find an off-ramp. Now, Israel has been threatened by Iran for a very long time. When the Islamic Republic of Iran was founded in 1979, their foreign policy was and still is the destruction of Israel. They have stated over and over again that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, and they have supported Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and a variety of different other proxies to threaten Israel. So I understand why Israel considers Iran with a nuclear weapon to be an existential threat. The path out is a negotiated settlement. We should be, and we are involved in that. That's what we can do and what we should be doing. And to the extent the Trump administration is engaged in those conversations, I will support them in that effort.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move back to taking a question from a caller. Next up, we have Michael, who calls us from Des Moines. Michael, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, Congressman, there's only certain things that you can control. I understand that. And this president has been horrible on some of his policies, particularly immigration. But I know that you're doing everything that you can. So my real question is there something you can do for Washington companies that are taking advantage with greed on the threat of tariffs? Because I own a restaurant, and there are certain companies, purveyors of food, purveyors of alcohol and liquor, that on the threat of a tariff, they raise their prices so that they can make more money when these prices and tariffs haven't even gone into effect yet. And it feels like our state representatives could do something to monitor the greed that is going on based on the threat of the president's tariff.
Yeah, no, you're right. In fact, I am going out to dinner less and less because it's getting more and more expensive for precisely that reason. It's not the restaurant's fault. It's the cost of the items that they're having to buy that's driving everything up through the ceiling even before the tariffs are put in place. Look, it's actually, the federal government has more responsibility for that than the state. There are antitrust rules. There are all kinds of regulations. And I'll tell you, this is one of the big things that I think that has made people frustrated with where our economy is at. The federal government over the course of the last 20 or 30 years has simply moved away from aggressively regulating corporations in the way that they should. blocking monopoly power, doing antitrust, also stopping price gouging. There are a lot of laws on the books that empower various agencies, depending on which area we're in, that can, go after this sort of price gouging, and they simply haven't done it. We've seen, monopolies get formed. We've seen price gouging, like you said, and there are regulations out there that can be used. So it's a good idea. I'll ask my staff to sort of look and see what specifically could be done about that and what agencies could use regulations to go after them. But I think that's something the federal government can do. I'm not as familiar with what laws they have in the state. I think they probably have some that would help them do that. But the federal government has traditionally passed laws to help regulate commerce in that way, to protect consumers against corporations who are abusing their power.
Yeah, it's just not really happening. And there's companies in the state of Washington, and there's only so much you can control with this president in charge who's horrible. But it seems like you could take some companies in our state and do some sort of regulation that says, like, no, you can't increase this just because, there could be a tariff. There has to actually be a tariff, because the rich are getting richer and the restaurants are suffering, and the people that are employed at those restaurants, hours are being cut, and the people that are going to those restaurants aren't able to afford it, and it's just it's a collapse of the local economy, and we got to concentrate on it locally.
Yeah, I went out to dinner to celebrate my son's graduation on Saturday in a series of restaurants down in the Issaquah, Gilman Village area. I couldn't believe there's nobody out there. Let me do this. I need to get more specifics for you. I think we have the ability to get your information offline here. Let me find out what the state might be able to do on that front and get back to you to get you a more specific and legitimate answer on that.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll take another caller. Joining us next is Janice, who calls us from Renton. Janice, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I know you've mentioned this before and even in previous town halls when we talk about a larger issue with this president in particular and federal court rulings. I've lost count how many have actually ruled against so many things that he's done. And I suppose saying that they all have to wait until they go to the Supreme Court might be a pipe dream, because they may not hear every case, and who knows if they'll even side in the direction that protects our Constitution. So my question is, as we see a lack of enforcement happening with the rulings they have made, what other recourse is there? Because any Republican right now who even talks about voting against or in any way being against something that is a GOP or Trump policy, after a 90-second conversation with Mike Johnson, they're changing their mind. And so I just really feel like we're, on the legislative branch, we're not going to get leverage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult situation without any question, but I would give two answers to that. One I've given before, the second one is new. So we'll get to that in a second. But look, we have got to put pressure on these legislators on the basic issue of the U.S. Constitution. That's why I think the rallies this weekend were so powerful. The No Kings message is it wasn't so much about, and I've listed a bunch of issues that are important to me, healthcare. I haven't mentioned foreign aid yet. Healthcare, foreign aid, immigration, the tariffs, all kinds of things the president's doing that's wrong from a policy perspective. But what the rallies this weekend were, regardless of how you feel about those issues specifically, how do you feel about our Constitution and our representative democracy? Because President Trump and his administration are attempting to shred it. They're attempting to destroy our system of checks and balances and basically put in place an authoritarian government that is only responsive to the president. And if you don't like that, you should stand up and say something about it. And I will say that with the president grabbing people off the streets, disappearing people like some third world dictatorship without due process, and people not knowing what people don't want. That conservative Republicans don't want that. So I think calling the president out is a way to then generate pressure from the people to get him to stop. And as I said, in a couple of instances, it has happened. And I think we need to continue to generate that type of people-oriented pressure around the issues that are going to expand the number of people who are with us. Certainly there's a lot of Democrats who care about cuts to Medicaid. We got to make Republicans care about that as well. But I think everyone cares about the idea that we're going to have a president who's going to use the U.S. military to come into your city or town and shred the Constitution and use the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement, which he's not supposed to do. So we need to keep that pressure up. And I know, it's not yielding immediate results. That doesn't mean we should stop. The second thing that I think we need to start having a broader conversation about is these lower courts that have issued court orders that the president is ignoring. No court that I'm aware of has yet issued sanctions. And that's what courts do. When you ignore a court order, you are sanctioned in one of two ways. You're fined or you're detained. And they have not done that. And the Trump administration has been blatantly defying these court orders. So I think we need to start a drumbeat of support for judges to fine them. And if you've got, I don't know, the Secretary of Homeland Security not obeying a court order, she can go ahead and spend the night in jail, like anybody else who's not obeying the law. So I think we need to start putting pressure on the federal courts at the district court and appellate court level, because you're right, all of this is not necessarily going to get up to the Supreme Court level, to say, what's the point of issuing a ruling if you don't back it up with some enforcement?
Thank you. So just quickly, what is the mechanism to get these courts to actually enforce the rulings they've already made?
Yeah.
I mean, as a citizen like myself, what do you actually do about that?
Yeah, well, the mechanism is they have the power to do it. It's in their authority. What I'm saying is, as part of the protest movement, we need to focus on that. And again, when you focus on a particular issue, you have seen some responsiveness. When we focused on the notion these people are being snatched up and sent to El Salvador, eventually they did send them back. So it does occasionally have an impact. So if we start calling for this, it will also help the courts feel comfortable doing it. It's not a simple solution, but we are not in a simple place. So thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll move back to Facebook to take a question. This one comes from Greg, who asks, what do you think about getting corporations out of real estate?
I'm in favor of it. In fact, I've got a bill, and it's not so much corporations. I don't know what you mean by that, but institutional investors, hedge funds, private equity funds that are buying up single-family houses and then renting them out. My bill would eliminate that, would basically not allow institutional investors, past a certain amount. If you're like, there are a lot of small sort of mom and pop shops that buy, 5, 10 homes, fix them up, rent them out. We're not going after those folks. We're going after the people who are buying up hundreds of houses in a whole bunch of different places and then renting them back. I think that helps drive up the cost of housing, but crucially, it also takes equity away from working families. And this is one of the biggest problems that we've had in this country in the last 30 or 40 years, is wealth has shifted aggressively to investors, shareholders, and executives, and away from wage earners. Well, one place that wage earners tend to get wealth is in their house. It's something, my family did it, I did it. You save up enough money, you take out a loan, you buy a house, it goes up in value, and the equity accrues to your benefit. Well, we've seen that the investors are following what has been referred to as the Jack Welch effect, which is the idea that corporations are going to try to suck every last dollar out of their worth to give to their investors. So they'll fire people, they'll cut pay, they'll cut benefits, they'll screw their consumers, all to try to make sure that the stock price is up another dollar next quarter. And that certainly impacted the wages for working people and the benefits for them. But the housing was always there. And now those same institutional investors who have commoditized corporations to take money out of the hands of workers are trying to do it in the housing market. They're trying to say, you don't get the equity, you're going to pay rent to me, and I'm going to get the equity. And I think that would contribute even more to the inequality in our society. So my legislation says, no, you cannot do that. If you're past a certain point, you are barred and prohibited from buying single family houses, and you have to divest of the ones that you own now. Personally, I think this is something that we ought to be able to get bipartisan support for, and I'm pushing on it. But I think it's an important step.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question, we'll take a caller again. This time we'll take Adam from Seattle. Adam, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Congressman. Good to hear from you. I have a question about just the atmosphere in Congress. What are you hearing about in reflections on this murder and attack on the state representatives in Minnesota over the weekend?
Yeah, we are deeply concerned. And I think it reflects a larger problem in society. I think that the Trump administration and I think the Republicans in Congress should speak out more forcefully against it. And they should also recognize that the president's decision to pardon all of the people who assaulted the Capitol on January 6th sent a very dangerous message across the country that political violence will be tolerated. And that's another thing. I haven't even gotten to this. I mean, there's so much that Trump's doing, it's hard to get to all of it. But his pardoning of anyone who supports him, I mean, he's pardoning drug dealers and fraudsters and the January 6th people, all based not on the merits of their case, but on whether or not they're loyal to Trump. And that sends a message. This type of approach is okay. There's the group of people who attempted to kidnap the governor of Michigan. And Trump was musing openly just a week or two ago that he would pardon them. And that is sending the exact wrong message. So I think Donald Trump's message that has been so insulting and belittling and denigrating of all of his political opponents, I mean, he takes the occasion on holidays like Memorial Day to send out messages talking about, the left-wing scum who are trying to destroy our country. I mean, that level of rhetoric legitimizes this. And for people who have mental health issues, as this guy appeared to have, they take that and they run with it. Now, I'm going to make one other point about this. This is not the exclusive purview of the right. There have been instances where people on the left have done this as well. In fact, on 3 occasions, I've had people come to my home. Once they vandalized my house. Twice, once they were here at 5 o'clock in the morning, pounding drums and screaming at me and waking up the neighborhood. And once they came at the more reasonable hour of noon. And we've seen this happen in the Seattle area. We've seen, mayors and county officials have protesters show up at their private residences and, express their views, in some cases in a very threatening way. That's wrong. That should not happen. We should not tolerate it. I should not have to worry that my family in my home is going to have a group of people come up and start screaming at them. And I know everyone says, well, we're just speaking our mind. We're standing up for our principles. There's a lot of different ways to do that without legitimizing threats and intimidation against elected officials. It shouldn't be accepted, shouldn't be allowed, and people shouldn't be doing it because it paints the picture in people's minds that it's okay to personally attack someone because you disagree with their position on an issue. I've seen it around here way, way more than it should be. So everyone needs to take a step back, calm down, and realize that in a representative democracy, you're going to have to deal with people who disagree with you, number one. And number two, try not screaming at people. Maybe try speaking to them and then listening to them and working together to try to figure out how you can resolve your differences. So I'm worried about it. We've had a number of attacks, both sides. Certainly there were 2 assassination attempts against the president. We had someone who targeted Republicans at a baseball practice. Jerry Connolly recently passed away, had someone with a baseball bat show up at his district office and start attacking his staff with it. This level of anger and vitriol at people who disagree with you in an elected position is dangerous in a representative democracy. We do not want to be one of those countries like you've seen where candidates are routinely being assassinated. I think we all need to tone down the rhetoric. But again, I'll end where I started. It starts with President Trump, because a lot of what he's saying and the pardons that he's passing out are given a free pass to people who want to think this way, and it is incredibly dangerous.
Congressman, if I can just follow up, it sounds, read between the lines, that you haven't heard any self-reflection from your Republican colleagues on how he's provoked this.
Nope. No, it's really irritating. In fact, sorry, I know Mike Johnson. It's a long story. He was on the Armed Services Committee when I was chairman. I've traveled with him. I know him personally, and I've spoken to him. And I have regularly gone after him on personal texts and saying, what the hell are you saying? Because he'll be the first one to come out if something happens to a Republican saying, oh, Democrats' rhetoric is just problematic. And meanwhile, the rhetoric that comes out of his own side, he doesn't say anything about. And then, of course, you saw Mike Lee, and I'm spacing on what Van Orden's first name is, Republican of Wisconsin, who's also regrettably on the Armed Services Committee, both of whom came out and instantly blamed left-wing lunatics for the violence, despite the fact that this guy was very clearly, an anti-abortion, pro-life right-winger. So no, to date, I have not seen self-reflection, and I'm pounding on Mike and others. If you want to change this fact, you got me going here, but when they arrested Senator Padilla down in California, he shows up, he asks a question at the press conference, and he's wrestled to the ground and handcuffed and treated, he's assaulted basically. And the Republicans come out, and Johnson came out and said, well, I think this is a big problem. I think the senator should be censured. And I was like, I actually texted him, was like, what the hell? Did you not see what happens? Well, I said, basically he asked a question, he was assaulted. He said, well, that's not what I heard. So, well, don't go off of what you heard, look at the video, So yeah, I have not yet seen the Republicans saying the type of things that they should be saying that will help move us in a more positive direction. And this goes back even before Trump, for that matter. Gabby Giffords is a close personal friend, and I know the guy who shot her was insane, but the negative attack atmosphere, I still think, planted something in that guy's mind that it's okay to go and shoot an elected official. So, yeah, I worry about it for myself, but also for the country.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to take an opportunity to remind everyone that if you would like to ask a question live, you can press *3 at any time. Also, if you'd like to join the Congressman's e-newsletter, you can press *6. Again, that's *6 to join the Congressman's e-newsletter. We'll move on to our next caller. We have Citra on the line, who is calling from Kent. Citra, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I got you loud and clear.
Okay. Hello, Congressman. It's been a pleasure to be here with listening to all the callers and your comments. Mine is not so much a question as a comment and a plea. I teach in STEM in South King County and at a community college, and I'm greatly distressed by the massive cuts in the National Science Foundation budget by as much as 80 to 85%. The 10-year average for their funding is $2 billion, and this year they're looking at $989 million for all of STEM research and education. In fact, the whole Department of Undergraduate Education in STEM, funded by the National Science Foundation, has been decimated. And I lost my own grant because of this, but this is not about my grant per se. It's about all the other grants that have been affected. And this directly is going to impact STEM education, which, being in the trenches, I can see our students are struggling post-COVID, and lack of funding is really I'm very, very worried about the future of science and the careers for scientists and engineers in our country. So I wanted to actually find out a little more about, I believe this funding has been approved by Congress, and so I don't think it can just be taken away. And I'm wondering what the near future can bring. There are several pending lawsuits, I know, but all that takes time, and I'm wondering what Congress can do to help regain funding for STEM education.
Yeah, you raise two really important points here. One is the degree of the war on science that is being brought about by the Trump administration. They are going after the National Science Foundation, they're going after the CDC, they're going after the NIH, they're cutting funds, they're firing people, they're blocking scientists. Stories are everywhere that, U.S. scientists now are looking to go to Canada or Europe or Australia or elsewhere because they're not, going to be getting the support that they need here to do their work. This is a huge blow to our country and our leadership. Even something as simple as the weather. I don't know if you saw it, went a little viral. There was a weatherman down in Florida who was saying, given all the cuts in our scientific analysis of the weather, he's not going to be able to predict where hurricanes are coming from. We are going after the guts of what has enabled us to be such an innovative, technologically advanced country. The president is attacking that in 1,000 different ways and weakening it. And I think it's important. I've made this point before. I haven't made it on the call here yet today. You look at all these cuts and all these firings and you try to figure out what it's about. Well, I'll tell you what it's about. President Trump used the federal government as a threat to him. He wants to weaken the federal government so that he can have more power. And that's the through line in all of these decisions. But that is weakening our country because our country isn't just about Trump. It's about a whole lot of other people. So speaking up for science, speaking up for this type of research and leadership is important. And whatever complaints people may have about how we handled COVID or the way scientists tend to be belittling in the way, well, let's fix that, okay? But let's not eliminate our research and scientific advantages that we have in this country. So that's number one. Number two is what we talked about earlier, and that is, you're right. This is money that has been appropriated by Congress. President Trump does not have the power or the authority to block it. Now, that's a short-term victory because he is president now, and we're headed towards the FY26 budget, which he would have the power to block. But certainly the grants that have been granted in previous years by previous Congresses and previous presidents, he's not supposed to be able to just cut off, which brings us back to my conversation about the courts and about everything that goes into that. But he is violating the law, and he's violating the Constitution by doing this. And several dozen courts have said that. And in some cases he's complied, in some cases he hasn't. But it is devastating our scientific community. So, I completely agree with you. It's also devastating to our workforce development. I love community and technical colleges and the place where you work because they give people the skills they need to go out and be employable and make a living. And if we're gutting those programs, it's blocking people's ability to get the skills and the training they need to go out and find jobs. And I'm sorry, if the moderator, I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am. Did you have something else on that? I'll take that as a no. If the moderator will indulge me for just 1 minute, I have one other point I want to make on that answer about the murder of the legislator and the attack on the other legislators in Minnesota. I have spoken out publicly against that type of protest, against targeting elected officials and using threats and intimidation to advance your agenda. And I have been criticized for that. People have said that, Adam Smith thinks all protesters should be arrested, which is just pure idiocy. And I made that very clear. I said, no, the people who came into my community and into my house and vandalized my house, they should be arrested. The ones who are committing crimes against our community and threatening public officials should be arrested. You want to protest? Protest. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. But when you're attacking an elected official in his home, that's a crime. And it ought to be dealt with and not just said, well, they're speaking their minds. There are ways to speak your minds that don't involve violence, threats, or intimidation, and that's what we ought to be encouraging. Sorry. Moderator, you can go on to the next question now.
Thank you, Congressman. Since we are getting close to the end of tonight's call, I do want to remind everyone once again that if you would like to join the Congressman's e-newsletter, please press *6 as soon as possible. Again, that's *6 if you would like to join the e-newsletter, and I'll have some more contact information at the very end of the call. Our next caller is Christopher, who calls us from Federal Way. Christopher, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Senator.
Good evening. How are you?
I have a concern with. I noticed something on the internet about Trump removing the bust of Martin Luther King, and myself being a person of color, it's concerning to me.
I'm sorry.
And
Moving what?
All the
I didn't hear what you said. You said you heard something on the internet about moving what? I didn't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. The removal of Martin Luther King's bust or the statue at the Oval Office. And I think about all the DEI issues that's happened, like with the former Joint Chief of Staff, Q.C. Brown, and others. I'm also retired military, and I wonder what can be addressed with that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something that I spoke at some length about in front of when Secretary Hegseth came before the Armed Services Committee. This is not just at the Department of Defense, but you are seeing an effort by the Trump administration to purge any reference to anyone who, well, for lack of a better way to put it, who isn't a straight white male. Department of Defense has been engaged in this as much as any other department, but not alone. The Department of Defense purged some, I think it's like 26,000 images from their website. And there was a study done, 80% of the images purged were of somebody other than a straight white male. So they have gone out, they're pulling the biography of Jackie Robinson out of libraries. They are very aggressively targeting any reference to the accomplishments of Black people, Hispanic people, women, gay and lesbians, obviously the transgender community they go after very aggressively. And it is, I think, a huge problem. Now, one other example of this is they are now trying to change the names of some of the ships. We've named ships after various different people. And they are trying to pull the names off of for people like Harvey Milk and Medgar Evers. I'm forgetting some of the other names, but basically any Black, Hispanic woman, gay and lesbian person, they're pulling the names off of there. And, the claim is that, these should go to people who were warriors in the military. Well, Medgar Evers, for example, served in the military, A, and B, standing up to white supremacy, Jim Crow, and racism in the South in the 1950s and the 1960s is an act of courage worthy of our country honoring. And to pull off that honor, I think is just completely and totally wrong. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is also putting the names of the bases named after the Confederates back. So they want to honor white supremacist, slave-owning racists who rebelled against the country, but they don't want to honor pioneers like Medgar Evers and Harvey Milk, who stood up for civil rights and equality in our country and gave their lives for that effort. Now, where this comes from is two places. One, there's a hell of a lot of racism in it. I think we just got to go ahead and say that. Pete Hegseth is on record as basically saying, the good old white Christian men who used to fight for this country are sort of what really made us great. And you've got a lot of other quotes from other people in the Trump administration equally troubling. But I will say, I think efforts at diversity, equity, and inclusion have sometimes not been helpful, and they themselves have gone too far. And we've experienced it. There have been examples of, just going too far in making identity the sole criteria. But that doesn't mean that you erase any effort to honestly address the history of racism, bigotry, sexism, homophobia, and go down the line in this country, and rightfully honor people who deserve to be honored. So, yes, there was some left-wing stuff. I don't want to get into the details that I think went too far and has gone too far in some instances. But now we've replaced that with a right-wing cultural evolution. Again, they are purging books and pictures and words, for that matter. They put an algorithm in to pull the word gay out of all things within the Defense Department, which achieved the amusing thing with the Enola Gay, the B-29 plane that dropped the first nuclear weapon in Japan. They pulled all images of the Enola Gay. Not apparently the algorithm didn't recognize that gay in that context meant something different, which is stupid. But let's think about it this way. Why can't we say the word gay in the homosexual sense of the word? So I think you are witnessing a right-wing cultural revolution within the Trump administration that is going to further divide us, and I think dishonor a lot of people who our country should rightfully honor.
I agree.
So I'm
Thank you,
fighting back
Congressman.
against. When we were on the Armed Services Committee, we passed the bill that got them to finally change the names of all those military bases like Fort Hood and Fort Bragg and others that were named after Confederates. And now the Trump administration is going against that law. So I've been in the middle of that fight, and I'll keep fighting back against it.
Thank you, Congressman. Looks like we have, excuse me. Looks like we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from Charles, who calls from Burien. Charles,
great.
You're on the line with the Congressman.
Hey, thank you very much, and thank you, Adam, for hosting this and coming out to talk to us. So I can preach to you all day long about equity, inclusion, rights, and all the rest, and you're just going to agree with me, and it's all great. How do we put the pressure that needs to be put on the Republican and the executive office to come around? I mean, it's always been my opinion, my belief that I'm the employer, you're the employee, as a representative of us being sent to Congress. How do we put the pressure on the representatives from other states to stand up and actually do their job and resist and take the power back that's been given to the president? What do we do as citizens in a state where we're already all in agreement to influence other states?
Let me give you two answers.
What do we do?
Because we're not 100% in agreement, and I appreciate. I kind of botched the whole what's wrong with DEI as it's currently put in place. Well, in some instances, it did go to levels that I think people found offensive. I mean, there were employment places around here that would divide people up into affinity groups. They would divide you up by your race. And, there were certain implications that if you were a white person, by definition, you're racist. And I think a lot of the ways that was handled, the education, I've experienced it. I've, had people say things that I thought were racist and offensive. And I think part of it is we can acknowledge that in our efforts to try to legitimately address bigotry and discrimination, some policies were adopted that really had the opposite effect, and we'll change those. We'll make it a more reasonable approach. So I think that's part of what we do. But to your larger question, and I think this is a good place to end, it is frustrating. Here we are in blue Washington. We got the members here and there. How do you build a national movement? And this is where I think the Democratic Party needs to do a much better job of going everywhere. Go into red states and red districts, build organizations, make connections, and organize. Now, how you do that is you organize across the country and organize around an issue that you care about. And I always use the example, there's a group called Results, and they lobby for foreign aid. But what they do is they recruit all across the country constituents, all right? So when they go back to Washington, D.C., if they want to meet from a member of Congress from Kansas, they have constituents from that member of Congress's district. And they have a nationwide effort. The message is the same. But now they have actual constituents of someone to go in there and explain why foreign aid is important. And you've seen, on immigration, for instance, when you start deporting people who are solid members of the community, even red areas, red districts, red states rise up against it. There was the case of the woman in Missouri who was incredibly popular, worked at a local restaurant. ICE came in and grabbed her, and a whole bunch of Trump supporters said, "What the hell?" And they organized against it. So you need to organize, whether you're talking about the environment. If you're with the Sierra Club should recruit constituents all across the country in all places and make that case. And that's how you build growing support. I would also say that when we're working in deep blue districts like mine that are 70% Democratic, let's think not just about messages and policies that are going to appeal to those solidly blue districts, but how can we implement policies that are going to have broader appeal? Now, there's a limit on this, I will grant you. There are policies where we're just not going to agree. But I still think that in blue areas like Seattle, King County, we can govern and message in a more inclusive way. I've long been frustrated on immigration that we have not been willing to talk about how we're going to secure the border and do immigration enforcement, while at the same time talking about why immigration is important, why the undocumented population needs a pathway to citizenship. You can do both. In my district, you don't have to do both. Like you said, it's a 70% Democratic district. We can just say what everybody wants to hear. Let's think about our messaging and our policy in terms of not just what's going to play in Seattle, but what's really going to work to grow the base of support across this country for ideas like comprehensive immigration reform, for ideas like the Build Back Better plan to actually help the working class, support for unions. Think about how to expand that to a group of people who might not see things exactly the same way as we do. And also, listen, not every Trump supporter is, a horrible right-wing, Neanderthal conservative racist, all right? Let's listen. Let's figure out what's going on here. How can we appeal to them more? And I'll tell you, it's starting to happen. Not happening as fast as any of us would like, but you saw that at these rallies. These rallies were all across the country. They weren't just in Seattle. They were in just about every community all across the country. We need to build on that. So I want to close by just saying thank you, everyone, for participating. We're going to do these on a regular basis. Like I said, I think teletown halls are a great way to reach a broader group of people. In-person town halls are more problematic, in part because people do show up and scream at me and threaten me. And in the atmosphere we're in right now, that can be a little difficult to pull off and actually have a reasonable conversation. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that in a way that is inclusive and doesn't, people don't want to show up to these things because they don't want to get in a fight. We ought to be able to have those conversations. But the teletown hall is a great way to reach a lot of people. I'm going to keep doing them. Look for other ways to interact. And I'll close as I always do. This is not your only opportunity to tell me what you think I ought to be doing. Please reach out to my office. Let me know what you care about. Let me know how we can be helpful to you. And thanks to the moderator and the people who set up this call.
Thank you, Congressman. And thank you to all of you for joining on today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you would like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, please follow him on Facebook, X, and Instagram at Rep. Adam Smith, as well as on Blue Sky at adamsmith.house.gov. If you would like to subscribe to his e-newsletter, just stay on the line and leave your name and email address after the tone. Thanks again for joining us. Have a good evening.